think a little bit about times in which we felt insignificant. Mrs. Green was talking about apps and other things that can prey upon making us feel insignificant. And going back a few years ago, when I was, I think around 10th grade, I went to this youth leadership thing, and it was a state thing, and then they would select somebody who would go on to the national level. And for some reason, I knew I was going to be selected. I knew it. You ever have that feeling if you just like know something? And so they went to announce it, and they mispronounced my name. They didn't say my name, it was somebody else's name. And so afterwards I thought that somebody would say, oh, well, I'm surprised they didn't choose you. There was nothing. I felt so insignificant. You know, there's a great theologian, John Calvin. He uses big words. I go with Calvin himself by Bill Watterson. And he cries out, I'm significant, and then realizes I'm just a dust speck. There are so many times in life in which we can be squeezed into thinking I'm insignificant. You know, the first presentation this morning that Michaela did, I remember the train story. I remember a campfire at summer camp in which the pastor told that story and realizing I am not insignificant. Jesus Christ was willing to give up his life for me. There is nothing insignificant about that. So there's that in the background, but there's also significance that comes from even being an ordinary person. We thought about this a little bit last week, the idea that being an ordinary person does not necessitate an average life. And do that, I want to think about Andrew's life today, the Apostle Andrew. When you think of Andrew, what's the significance of Andrew's life? Exactly. The same thought I had. So we're going to think about this a little bit. All right? We'll take a look at a scripture passage. John chapter 1. This is the calling of the 12. The next day, again, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked by and said, Behold the Lamb of God. The two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, What are you seeking? And they said to him, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? He said to them, Come and you will see. So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. One of the two who heard John speak and followed Jesus was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, We have found the Messiah, which means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas, which means Peter. A few things of importance about Andrew here. One is, Andrew isn't just Andrew, he's Simon's Peter brother. How would you like that all the time? Oh, hi Alan, you're Ben's brother. Oh, it's good to see you, Ben's brother. How great does that make you feel? I'm so significant. Andrew's the one that followed Jesus, but he gets referred to as Peter's brother. Another thing that's important here is we have found the Messiah. And very briefly, I want to mention something, because I have issues. But this is not part of a dialogue in which you tell me what my issues are. I have an idea of what a few of them are. I'm going to tell you my issue with this story is in John chapter 1, the calling of the disciples, Andrew goes and finds Peter. What about the call of the disciples in which they drop their nets and follow Jesus? In the other Gospels, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, you saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea. Remember that story? Immediately, they followed Jesus. Does that sound a little bit different than the story I just told you? I have issues. But here's the answer. See, I'm just making sure you're on par here. A little word picture for you. Timeline. Oh, you guys are so sharp. You're smarter after watching the things this morning, I can tell. In John chapter 1, it's a call to salvation, in which Jesus is down here, down near Jericho, along the Jordan River. That's when they realize who Jesus is. And Jesus calls him. This is when Andrew goes to Simon and says that we found the Messiah. Later on is the call to ministry. They're up here at Capernaum. They're fishing again. They didn't leave everything right when Jesus first called them to salvation. Probably about a year later, Jesus goes up there and says, now is the time to follow me. They'd already seen Jesus as Messiah, and now later on, they are ready to leave everything and follow him. I want to think a little bit about what to learn from Andrew in this. The guy who would come to know Christ, and then eventually would leave everything to follow him. There's three pieces I want to pick up. One is background. Does anybody remember Where's Waldo? Remember that? I love Where's Waldo. Is Waldo still around? Where is he? All right. But you look at something and you try to find him, you know that he was there. This is Andrew. Andrew is all through the New Testament. He's the first to come to salvation. He's an apostle. He doesn't stick his foot in his mouth as much as his brother Peter. He's not as bold and brash as some of the other disciples. But he's always called Simon's brother. He's only mentioned 9 times in the New Testament. He's more serving than seeking credit. If I was Andrew, I would feel pretty invisible. He did some pretty tremendous things. He's pretty awesome. He's the one that found the Messiah. And he's called Simon's brother. Rather than being caught up and feeling invisible, he saw ways to serve God. In many ways, we get a picture of Andrew in the Gospels in which he's a silhouette, not a portrait. We don't get the well-defined picture of who Andrew is. He's just the guy that did stuff. How willing am I just to do stuff? How often do I want credit, or how often do I want people to recognize me and give me significance, rather than just accepting the significance that God has given me as his child? I think that's one thing to learn from Andrew. You guys are smart. I'm going to give you the answer to this quiz. So the first thing that Andrew did was he went to find his brother after he found the Messiah. He's comfortable introducing individuals to Jesus. We never see Andrew preaching to crowds like Peter. We never see Andrew as like the popular guy. He's the one who loves people and desperately wants people to know Jesus. So he goes to his brother first. Later on, we have a story in which Philip and Andrew are out and about, and some Greeks come to Philip. They're like, we want to see Jesus. Philip doesn't just take them to Jesus. He finds Andrew and says, let's take them to Jesus. How much are we like Andrew and willing to take people to Jesus? I like to say I'm a quiet person. I'm an introvert. I don't want to do these things of talking about Jesus. I think Andrew's in the same mold as I am, but willing to bring people to Jesus. Yogi Berra quotes are always important to have. You can observe a lot just by watching. I think Yogi Berra got that one from Andrew. Remember the story of the feeding 5,000? There was a guy who found a kid that had some fish and bread. Guess who that guy was? Andrew. Wow, you're so smart. How did you ever guess? Yeah. Thanks. Heard a couple sermons on that one. Yeah. So Andrew is the one who brought the kid. There's a sense of expectation. The kid having a little bit of bread and fish, what's the big deal? It's insignificant. But yet Andrew saw the significance in that there was a possibility, an expectancy of what Jesus might do with it. I wonder if the same is true for us. That we overlook the good things that God has for us, the good things that God has blessed us with, and we just say, well, it's not as good as somebody else's. is not enough to take care of the issue. I want to finish thinking big. For those of you who are astute and know that good sermons have acronyms in them, you realize that we're putting together something here. Andrew has a willingness to be in the background. He seeks out individuals, and he looks at people's gifts. You and I have a chance to live more than an average. You and I have the opportunity to live out so much more than just getting through life. We don't have to be all worked up and troubled by being a background person or being somewhat in the woodwork. God uses that in tremendous ways. He leverages our lives to reach other individuals and to see the gifts around us. One thing that I hope that we do today as we reflect on all that we saw up here this morning is that we see the gifts of people and we encourage them in those. Those are God-given gifts of the kids up here, of kids out here, of adults out here, that we seek and see in other people, what are those good things that God has given you? And to encourage each other. I think that's a part of living so much more than an average life. I don't want to live an average life. I don't think that's what God has called us to. I feel pretty similar to Andrew in a lot of ways, and I hope to live that out, and I hope that we seek out ways to do the same.